20.
Yeah, I know. Want to start the recording. Okay, today is Wednesday, January 20th, 2021. Welcome to the BEKI Schmooze. Our presenters tonight are Nigel Savage and Shamu Sadeh from HAZON, and you'll hear more about them later. We're very happy to have them with us. My name is Daryl Rotman Cooperstock, but I think I know most of you. Can everybody hear me okay? Just nod or do something. Yeah, okay. Tonight's session is being recorded, so just please be aware of that. If you have any objection to that, bye. See you later. And it'll be put, the recording will be posted in the next couple of days on the BEKI website under the learning menu. Go all the way down on the drop-down menu to online schmoozes, and it should be there in its entirety. Thanks to Eric for always posting these really quickly. For everyone's sake, we ask that everyone remain muted during our presentation, unless you've been called on to make a comment or to ask a question. If you do have a comment or question for either Nigel or is it Shamu? Okay. I want to get it correct, so that's fine. Just as usual, in the chat function, please send a message directly to me that says just the word question or the word comment. Do not type your entire comment or question right there unless it's something you don't plan to speak out loud and you just want to convey to the rest of the participants. And I will make a list of people as I get those and call on people in order. Nigel and Shamu have really want this to be an informal, free-flowing discussion, and so we won't wait until a long presentation is over before calling on you to ask your questions or make comments. Please feel free to not to be rude and interrupting people, but to let me know, and I'll keep a close eye on the chat so that I can call on you at an appropriate break. When I do call on you, at that time, if you'll unmute yourself and then mute yourself again while that's being addressed, that would be helpful. I will be monitoring for background noises for the comfort of everybody who's listening and participating. Does anybody have any questions about format or technology? Okay, in that case, we begin tonight's introductory comments, and there are a couple, so please be patient as we move through. It'll be worthwhile. I turn this over now to Rachel Bashevkin.
Hi, everybody. On behalf of the officers of Beth-El Kesser Israel, I want to welcome everyone to this schmooze. We're delighted to be joined by Hadassah and by other friends of BEKI. We appreciate that all of you decided to join us tonight. After all, there are so many distractions, pandemic worries, news coverage, inauguration events. We're preoccupied by the transitions in Washington, D.C. and transitions in our congregation. At the end of tonight's schmooze, as is our tradition, Shoshana Zaks will preview our upcoming events. But I want to take this moment to announce that on the first Wednesday of March, which is March 3rd, our weekly schmooze will be a town hall meeting with BEKI President Yaron Liu and members of the BEKI board. You'll be receiving more information about that event. Meanwhile, as usual, Yaron and the board members and the officers encourage you to reach out to us if you have any immediate concerns. Tonight, though, our focus is HAZON and its environmental work, and I'll turn things over to Shoshana Zaks.
Hi, I'm Shoshana. I'm the chair of programming at BEKI, and I'm going to be brief, but I'm very lucky to get to introduce one of the most passionate people I've ever met, Josh Weinstein, who is a member of BEKI and whose day job is working as an engineer, but who's deeply passionate about environmental justice and Judaism, and in that work has been quite involved with HAZON and specifically with both of our speakers tonight. So he's going to give us a more personal, in-depth introduction to our speakers. And Josh, thank you very much for helping to bring this to fruition tonight.
Thank you, Shoshana, so much. Really excited to be here for this evening. So I prepared a short introduction. So here we go. It is a Jewish idea that the earth is alive. It is a being, just like humans and animals, requiring our care, compassion, and wonder. A reverence that leads us to seek what is the right way to be in a relationship with it. In the words of Nigel, who I'll introduce with Shamu in a moment, HAZON is focused on turning Jewish life outwards to make a difference in the world for all, and using that process to strengthen Jewish life. I think one thing that HAZON offers is tools to answer the question of how Judaism can guide us to be both in meaningful relationship with each other and with the greater than human world. By the way, can I get a thumbs up that people can hear me? Okay, cool. Mic check first. An idea that I learned from both Shamu and Nigel is that prayer can open pathways of consciousness that I believe we need now more than ever. A shift in consciousness, in fact, in how we relate to the earth. As I open this introduction, Judaism teaches us that the earth is alive. Each morning, in a burst of blessings, Jews proclaim Baruch She'amar, an exuberant flow of praise for a God who shows compassion to the earth and to all creatures. I want to suggest that this provides a framing for how Judaism is asking us to live each day and experience every moment. In so many places throughout our rich tradition, we are reminded from the outset that we are just one small piece, dust if you will, in an extraordinary web of life. Now I'd like to provide a few words of introduction to welcome our guests, Nigel and Shamu. Shamu Sadeh has a gift to inspire wonder and awe in our lives, to profoundly connect Jewish ideas by bringing new awareness to our lived experience. He helps individuals discover connection to the places where they live and to the people and the environment around them. Shamu is the Managing Director of Education at Isabella Friedman Center in the Berkshire Hills of Northwest Connecticut. He is a co-founder, former director, and current teacher of immersive experiential programming, such as Adama, and is the former director of Teva, which the Ezra Academy here in Greater New Haven has continued to be a part of over the years. His work intersects with farming, Jewish education, and exploring wilderness, and he has written articles and taught at universities on environmental and Jewish issues. These last 3 weeks, I've personally had the privilege to learn closely from and be transformed by Shamu's teaching through the Adama at Home program. In your questions, ask Shamu how composting is the perfect analog to teshuva, repentance, and also as a model for prayer. After learning with Shamu just these last 3 weeks, I find myself actively seeking moments when I can just wander. Nigel Savage is a visionary in every sense of the word, who has dedicated his life to transforming communities by tapping into Jewish wisdom. He is constantly reimagining how we can tactfully respond to rapidly changing realities and the increasing urgency of climate change. He founded and continues to lead HAZON as its president and CEO. Nigel was awarded an honorary doctorate from the Jewish Theological Seminary, JTS, and has been named one of the 50 most influential Jewish leaders in the United States. From being around Nigel, I personally have been moved by his ability to connect with diverse groups of people, his keen awareness of the sanctity of moments, and I have been empowered by his belief that individuals matter, that each person has the power to transform themselves and those around them. I believe this conversation tonight is an opportunity for BEKI to acknowledge the great work that's already taken place and to engage deeper on these topics as both individuals and as a synagogue, to be inspired, to take action, to forge new connections to the shul, to the land and sources of wonder around us, and to our wider New Haven Jewish community. HAZON has much to contribute and share with us in this project. With that, I'm tremendously honored to welcome Shamu and Nigel to BEKI.
So, first of all, Daryl and Shoshana and Rachel and Rabbi Tilson. First of all, for sure, a big thank you to each of you. Josh, that was amazing. Shamu and I sort of moved and honored. And I do want to say that one of the unexpected themes of this evening is in fact parents and kids. And I want to say firstly that this shul is a shul in which you were talking about the officers. Brian Karsif, I think, was an officer and maybe president of BEKI, and his daughter Jessie worked for HAZON for a long time and is a dear friend of Shamu and mine. And so I want to pay tribute to sort of parents and kids in the Karsif family. Secondly, Josh, you are amazing. Like, you're a one-man force for making things happen. The bike ride that you started in New Haven all by itself is extraordinary. And of course, the apple doesn't fall very far. And Elliot and Sue, it is amazing to see you guys. And you absolutely should shep nachas because Josh is amazing. And at the same time, you personally also have been an incredible inspiration to me and to so many people. And you kind of sit there and do so much good in so many ways. And I really, really, really thank you.
Thank you.
And I just want to add to this that Shamu, in fact, in a minute is going to talk, he's going to talk a little bit about his journey, but in the course of doing that, he's going to talk about him and his father. And as it happens, my father died on Tu B'Shvat 3 years ago. And next week will be his yort site. And I, to some extent, speak and teach in his honor this evening. So I want to thank all of the parents who gave each of us so much. And in it being given to us, there is, of course, the desire and the obligation to play it forwards. I also, the last piece of introduction I just want to say is that, of course, it is really amazing to teach right now, this evening after today. HAZON and many of us have been working for the last year, the last 4 years, the last 10 years, the last 20 years on lots of things. But in fact, to be able to learn together and think about Tu B'Shvat, about the environment, about Jewish tradition, about BEKI, about HAZON, on a day when the United States has rejoined the climate accords, and in which so much that is now good and needs to happen is going to happen, it feels very, very profound. And it's clearly, in one sense, a coincidence of timing, but it really feels joyous for me to be able to share in that moment. I want to say just a couple of things to really frame this, really to just say a couple of words about Tu B'Shvat and HAZON. Then I'm going to hand over to Shamu to talk a little bit about his story in Adamah and a couple of practical things for people. And then I want to come back and say a couple of larger things, and all the way through, we're happy to take questions. First of all, I just want to note that every Jewish holiday comes to remind us of something that ideally we should be thinking about the whole year round. So the whole year round, we should be striving to be the best person that we can possibly be. But if we forget the period about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the period of tshuva, of return and repentance, comes to remind us. And the whole year round, we should be getting rid of superfluity. We should be getting rid of stuff that we don't need. We should be getting rid of chametz, both literal and metaphorical. And if we forget, the period from Purim to Pesach comes to remind us. And so the question is, what is it that Tu B'Shvat comes to remind us of that we really should be thinking about every single day of the year? And Josh, as you so beautifully put it, Tu B'Shvat comes to remind us that we're part of the world. We're part of the physical world. We sit here right now and we've got cameras and lights and metal and glass and all these disintermediating pieces, but literally everything that we have comes from the natural world that sustains us. And it's so possible to go through our life and forget that. And if we do, there are many places in Jewish tradition that the tradition comes to remind us, but preeminently at this time of year, Tu B'Shvat does. Now, BEKI already, I want to say, you guys are for sure in the top 5 percentile of shuls and communities around North America in the work that you've done in recent years and going back many years, and not just the solar roof and composting and various things. I was looking through your website and I saw that in the year 2000, you won the EPA Energy Star for Congregations Award. And I just want to tell you that in 2000, so did HAZON. We were the first non-congregation to get that award. So I love the fact, without knowing it, that we were, as it were, honored together 20 years ago. You guys have already taken steps forward. The question for all of us now is, what do we do next? And part of what we as an organization have started to understand is that our shared task is actually to drive systemic change in Jewish life, so that within a decade, to be Jewish is necessarily to care about creating a more sustainable world for everybody. Increasingly, we think of it as being analogous to the women's movement. People said, why can't a girl have a bat mitzvah? Why shouldn't a woman be a rabbi? Why should any woman be paid less than a man for the same job? And it took many organizations, many programs, many essays, many books over 70 years. But if you walk into BEKI or any other Jewish institution today as a girl or a boy or anything else, it's different. Well, we have to effect that kind of change in the next 10 years. And so the question is, what does that look like and how do we do it? So I want to hold that question and I want to hand over to Shamu. Shamu, for you to tell a little bit of your story, you and your family, and connecting it to land and how Adamat arose, and maybe things that people on the screen are doing or could do. And then I'll say a couple more things and then we'll throw it open.
Thanks, Nigel. Well, first of all, we should all be blessed with such students as Josh. It's a pleasure studying and learning from him. And we should learn from our students. And what I learned from him already tonight is that we should never again, when we do an introduction of someone, read off a piece of paper. We should give a fully actualized introduction of things that we've absorbed from the teachers. That was beautifully done and very much appreciated, Josh. Yeah, so thanks for that. And congratulations to this community for doing all the things you've done, some of which Nigel's mentioned. So I'm blessed with this wonderful, strange and curious name. So people ask me about my name and I'll tell you a little bit of that story. I am the son of Hungarian Jewish Holocaust survivors and political refugees. So Shamu is a Hungarian nickname for Shmuel or Samuel. And Fenveshu was the name that I was born with, which literally means from the pine forest. And I've spent most of my time in the north, so it makes sense. And I used to be a wilderness guide. And then people say, wait, you're a Jewish farmer and your last name is Sadeh. What's the chance of that? And so that story is coming too. It is both an ancient family, well, an old family name, and it wasn't the name I grew up with. My parents came to this country in the late 50s as political refugees, and we lived in DC, and we had a front yard, like many people's front yards. From the front door to the sidewalk, when my parents purchased the house in the early 70s, was grass. And I, as a young child, helped my dad tear up that grass and plant a massive garden. We had Jerusalem artichokes that were 12 foot high right up against the sidewalk. We had raspberries, we had peppers, we had tomatoes, we had flowers. It was, I don't know if you all have heard this term permaculture, or, it was a perennial and annual mix. It was ecologically designed before any of those things existed. And it made such a splash in what was kind of a formal DC neighborhood that the infamous, if you remember the 80s, Secretary of the Interior, oh my God, his name just dropped out of my mind.
James Watt.
Thank you. James Watt, under Reagan, once walked by our house and said something really nasty about my garden, about my dad's garden, which my dad took as a badge of honor. What is this mess? And so I grew up gardening with my father and composting from a young age. And my father brought that connection to the land from Hungary and from his grandparents, who were Jewish farmers in the northeast corner of Hungary in the Carpathian Basin. And amazingly enough, rare for Jews in that part of the world, they were landowners for the last few hundred years. And when we went back and visited their ancestral village, people could still point out the fields that belonged to my great-grandfather in the early 20th century. And I said, well, how do you know? You just remember that these were their fields? And well, no, that, we can tell from the soil because your great grandfather did all those things, did basically composted, and he did soil improvement in a very sandy, not particularly fertile part of the world. My dad didn't grow up with that, but grew up with family stories about that. And so I grew up in the garden working with my dad. Fast forward, and I am a young adult without a real connection to religious Judaism, more interested in environmental education. I found my passion in taking people, kids, adults, out into the forests, out into the rivers, out into the mountains, and having them see things, understand basic ecology, understand the relationship between things, and how that might inform the way they live, what they eat, how they transport themselves around, what they do for work, et cetera, et cetera. And I was out on the Olympic Peninsula in the early 90s doing that work, and had a bit of a crisis in faith in secular environmentalism. I found that it was lacking in a kind of compassion. We were surrounded by logging communities that were dependent on cutting some of the last big trees in the temperate rainforest, old growth trees. And there was a nasty fight always between the mostly urban environmentalists and rural working class loggers. And I also found that I lived in this very beautiful place and took people out in the outdoors, and there were things that I wanted to express that I didn't have the language for. And that time, 24, 25 years old, I didn't have the language of Jewish prayer, awe, amazement, any of that. And most of the people around me were white kids experimenting with kind of Native American inspired religions. And I looked into that a little bit into Buddhism, and both of those things didn't quite feel right to me. And thankfully, at the same time, my dad was writing a book about our family history, which the farmers, not just farmers, but I should say also followers of Hasidic rabbis who are really nature-inspired rabbis in that part of the world, Isaac Taub, the Kalabar Rebbe. And so they were able to somehow connect their own farming life to their version of Judaism. And my dad sent me a book that turned out to be very important for me, which was Let the Earth Teach You Torah, Ellen Bernstein's first kind of book of Jewish environmental curriculum. And at that time, I had seen none of that, got very excited about all those things, and I went to study in Israel at Kibbutz Keturah, what is now the Arava Institute, and came back to work at the Teva Learning Center in its early years. And at that time, at the Teva Learning Center, and we taught the kids from the Ezra School, there wasn't a curriculum. There was Let the Earth Teach You Torah. There was maybe another book, but you weren't, there wasn't any book or things you were handed. You had to figure it out yourself, which for me was a very exciting task, to figure out how to make those connections and make them real for kids. And at the time here at Isabella Friedman, there wasn't a whole lot going on. And the Isabella Friedman didn't run its own programs except for a senior camp for a few weeks in the summer, Passover. And a number of us young environmentalists, young new Jewish environmentalists, got very excited about making Isabella Friedman into a place that could teach and model Jewish sustainability. And one of those people was Adam Berman. Both of us left, went and did other things. And 8 years later, I get a call from Adam that he's applying to be the executive director at Isabella Friedman. And would I come back and do something like what we talked about all those years ago? And that was to start the Adama Farming Fellowship. Shortly after that, Adam got his friend Nigel Savage to join the board. And the rest of that is a history of greening programs at Isabella Friedman and at HAZON in partnership, and eventually literally together, that spans the last 20 some years.
Excuse me, Shamu.
Please.
We do have a question that came up, if you don't
Great.
mind the interruption.
Great. Not at all.
Okay, Alice, you want to unmute yourself? And go ahead. Alice? Do you want to go and ask your question?
I mean, it's a little premature.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, so you want to wait till later then? Okay, sorry. Go ahead then.
Oh, no, that's
Sorry.
okay. No, I'm excited to hear it. I got us excited about your question, Alice. So I'm really blessed with this task of farming together in Jewish community and what that means. And often that means getting up early in the morning and praying around a campfire at the lake and singing Modani with the mist rising off the lake, and then teaching people how to milk goats and what's Jewish about goats and why our ancestors were shepherds and how that formed large parts of our religion, and showing people how to plant things and grow things, and sitting down at a table with so many things that we've harvested, and what it means to say blessings over things that you have worked very hard to create, where they won't be taken for granted. Yeah, and I feel really blessed to be able to do this work. And you know, I'll leave you with kind of my three of my core lessons from teaching and providing experiences in Jewish food and farming. And the first one I'll call Pokeach Ivrim, which is this beautiful phrase that means literally who opens the eyes of the blind, from the morning prayer service. We understand this in the tradition to not be about blind people, but to literally about all of us are blind to so many things. And it's about a change in perception. It also reminds me of God lifting Hagar's eyes and her seeing the well of water, Moses stopping and seeing the burning bush. Some of my favorite Torah stories are these moments of opening, of seeing something, of a shift in perception. And that for me is really been a beautiful part of understanding what Judaism does for us every day. Because without seeing it, we don't experience the awe, and we don't experience gratitude. And I guess the second thing is modani, just the practice of gratitude in daily life. That for me, from being someone who's in the outdoors and growing food is elevated. Not that I don't forget it, but I get often reminders of that. And when you come to the farm, God willing, you all get a chance to come to Isabella Friedman, visit us, you'll see big purple signs around our farm that say, what are you grateful for? Just ask the question, what are you grateful for? And that's often the way we start our day, that Adama is asking that question. And what a beautiful question to be asked, and how beautiful to grow up with a tradition that puts an emphasis on gratitude and starting our day that way. And Josh and the rest of our class earlier this week studied The Voice from the Whirlwind, the last chapter of the book of Job. And something I find continually inspiring. And Job's last words to God are, I am comforted that I am dust. So I think my third lesson from Jewish ecological living and learning is about humility. It's about being comforted that I am dust, and knowing that Adam, the first human, Adam, was made from the dust of the Adamah. And that interconnectedness and that sense of humility, and the sense that we are continually called to make sacrifices in our own comfort for others, both the human and the non-human life. And I find that very inspiring.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to, Alice, go ahead.
Sorry. Basically, my question, since I'm new to HAZON and I am new to learning about you, my question is the kind of relationship that you build with congregations. And particularly, do you have a HAZON congregation direct relationship? And I'm also very interested in how many of us who are Orthodox are involved with you.
Yes. So I think I'll take a stab at that. Shamu, you add anything that you want to add? Let me actually, Alice, take the second question first because it's a shorter answer. And it's simply the case that on the one hand, HAZON really genuinely wants to play across the fullest range of Jewish life. We're rooted in Jewish tradition. We want to engage with Jewish communities. And truthfully, it's not just that we want to engage with Jewish communities. We want to engage people of any religious background or none. In reality, there is very, very little that we do in the ultra-Orthodox community, but there are certainly Orthodox communities that we're involved in. We're going to be doing our Isabella Friedman Jewish Retreat Center. Put your hands up if you've been to Isabella Friedman, just so we can see. So a few of you have done. Isabella Friedman is not that far away from New Haven. It's a retreat center where our Adama farming program is. It was closed down for a chunk of last year because of COVID, but we are going to be opening again this year as of Pesach, and we do retreats there during the year. And as it happens, that normally we do retreats with a pretty wide flavor of communities and davening simultaneously present. At Sukkot, typically we would have an Orthodox minyan, a traditional egalitarian minyan, and a renewal minyan. Because of COVID, our capacity is lower. I'm sorry about that siren outside. And so for Pesach this year, as it happens, I think that we're going to be partnering with Chovevei Torah and Maharat and HAR, and it's basically going to be a sort of like a liberal Orthodox Pesach retreat. On the first question, let me, if I may, say a couple of things that I wanted to go on and say. This is a period of new beginnings already. This is the start of a fiscal year. It's the new year for trees. It's the start of a new 4-year cycle in American Jewish life. And this coming Rosh Hashanah is the start of the Shemitah year, the sabbatical year in Jewish life. And what we've seen happen over the last 5, 10, 20 years, to some extent, as Shamu described, and HAZON has been a part of this, is that person by person, institution by institution, we've started to self-critique the way that we live, and we've started to effect changes. And somebody's put on a solar panel, and somebody decides to eat less meat, and somebody decides to get a smaller car, and somebody decides to ride their bike. The thing that we're now saying to communities, and we would say to each and all of you, and that includes, by the way, not just BEKI and people who are other parts of other shuls, but I would say this to people who are part of Hadassah chapters as well. We want to invite communities to take the period from now until the end of the Shemitah year, which is September of 2022. It's about a 1.5 year period, and really start to flesh out a 7-year vision for your institution, for your community, and say, what would it be if my shul, my day school, my JCC, by 2029, absolutely was at the front edge of Jewish life, of civic life, in relationship to environmental sustainability. That would affect education, all the things that we learn, action, all the things that we do, advocacy, all the ways that we speak up in the world. And HAZON, through our HAZON Seal of Sustainability program, is essentially inviting institutions to make that commitment. And we're saying we will hold your hand and be in relationship with you as you then start to figure it out. I'll just give you a couple of examples of the sorts of things that we are saying to communities at the moment and that we would say to you. First of all, most Jewish institutions have a kashrut policy. It'll be different in an Orthodox shul, a Reform temple, a pluralistic JCC. What would it be like if a community took a year to go from a kashrut policy narrowly construed to a food policy? We're not in any sense against kashrut. My wife and I keep a strictly kosher home in our apartment by traditional standards of kashrut. But a food policy is wider than a kashrut policy, but it includes, where does our food come from? How are the workers treated? How are the animals treated? How is the land treated? Do we grow any of our food? Do we compost our food? What about food justice? What food do we serve at simchas, at bar and bat mitzvahs? What do we serve at kiddush? Do we serve meat? Why or why not? Do we use soda? Why or why not? What are our relationships with our local community? What have we learned about food justice? What are food policies in our community? And when we say spend a year developing a food policy, we really mean these as open questions. I don't mean those as rhetorical questions. Each of those is worthy of being unpacked. But if you do it the right way, if you actually in any given community say, we're going to give ourselves a year, potentially the period from now until the Shemitah year, or even during the Shemitah year, to do this work slowly and thoughtfully, and to involve people who are on the board, people who are already fired up about these issues, some of the kids, some of the teenagers, some people who are not yet part of the community, and really go on a journey. It's an extraordinary way to fire up people who are already involved, to bring new people through the door, and ultimately to strengthen what it means to be Jewish in the 21st century. I want to give you two other examples. In the next year, we're as an organization planning to develop a bar and bat mitzvah program. And we really want to help shuls take at least some of the 10, 11, and 12-year-olds who increasingly care about these issues, who've seen Greta Thunberg and been inspired by her, and craft a bar or bat mitzvah process that lets kids really engage with these issues and weave it into their own ceremony. And the final thing, going back to the thread this evening about parents and kids. So Shamu talked about his father, and earlier on Elliot Shepnachas about his son Josh. But in the last year during COVID, HAZON launched the Jewish Youth Climate Movement. And we're starting to connect up teenagers around the country who care about these issues. And one of the people who's leading it is Sadeh, Shamu's son, who's a phenomenal guy in his own right. And so as part of a community starting to flesh out a 7-year vision, one of the things that we would do as part of that, say any of your teens who are interested in this, we really invite them to be part of the Jewish Youth Climate Movement. Most shuls struggle with what to do with their kids after bar and bat mitzvah. And for an increasing number of kids, we're putting them in relationship with their peers. We did an amazing session last week of teens teach their rabbis. And we had some of our teens online working with rabbis. And it's an amazing thing to have happen. I'm happy to, Shamu and I both are happy to throw it open for further thoughts and comments and questions.
Anybody have anything they want to share? Was that, CJ and Becky? No doubt. Go ahead.
Hi. Thank you both so much. And it was great that you guys worked together because you each shared what you're working on in slightly different ways, which gave us a spiritual and sort of perhaps more practical perspective. But getting to the practical, you mentioned a 7-year pursuit of sustainability, working within your institution, whatever it might be. So do you have a guidebook or guidelines or historical references for how you might have done that with other institutions, so that if Becky were considering to do this, we could actually look at something and have that reviewed by the board to say, yes, this is something we want to work with, or at least use it as a framework?
Yes, that's what our HAZON seal of sustainability is. And I would certainly say, feel free to have a mooch around our website. It's possible that some of it is password protected, but if it is, I'm going to put this in the chat for everybody or for whomever is the relevant person. And I'm also, and she will forgive me for this, I'm going to put mine and Shamu's emails, but I'm going to put down Hannah Henzer, who runs this program. And if you want to talk to her about it, she'd be really happy to answer questions about it. But I do want to say, we have tons and tons of resources, and we do have tons of ideas and things. But I want to say really genuinely, it's one of the things that people from BEKI said to us, just the fact that this thing this evening is called Schmooze is itself a really interesting frame, right? It actually isn't about Shamu or me saying, you got to do X or you can't do Y, right? It is about this year of all things in our isolation has also been about coming together. And every shul is different, every community is different, every person has a different passion. And I think that what we would say is that, and especially, like one of the other things that's exciting, at some point, put your hands up if you've already had a vaccine. Great, we've got 1 or 2 people, right? If we were doing this a month from now, more hands will go up. 3 months from now, a lot more hands will go up, right? We've come through this year where like everything was getting worse, right? And we're actually going to come into a year where things are going to open up. And it's going to be really exciting, right? Rabbi Till said, I can see that background. And I don't know if that's literally like you're in it or it's a screenshot, but it's right. It looks like a really nice room, right? And even if you're not physically in it right now, at some point in the next month or 2 or 3 or 4, you're going to be able to be back together physically. And it's going to feel really profound and it's going to feel really moving. And so the notion of coming together and say, let's brainstorm. What is our vision for this community 7 years from now? This applies to JCCs in Pennsylvania and communities in other places. But what is our vision for this place? One of the powers you see of a 7-year frame is that I think that effective change happens when you have a big vision and you take practical small steps. One of the things, again, that was really moving about today is that President Biden stood up today and he gave, in a sense, a very simple speech and a very general speech. It wasn't a policy speech. It was setting out a vision of this country. It was setting out a vision of bringing people together. And that was really important. And then he came back to the office and he started signing things and doing things, right? And as a community, we need a big vision and we need practical next steps. If you just have the vision, it's kind of like lovely, but it's like pie in the sky and nothing happens. But if it's just things on a to-do list, it's impossible to really be excited by it. It's impossible to be really animated by it. It's impossible to drive a larger change. And so that's why we want to really invite you to use the frame of the Shemitah year and an upcoming 7-year cycle in Jewish life, in a sense, to excite yourselves.
Thank you. I think, Jennifer, you had a question?
Oh, yeah, actually it was me. Hi.
Oh, well, okay.
I'm Jim.
Jim.
And thank the presenters. It's really nice and interesting perspectives. I guess my question is, suggestions on how Jewish congregations can interact with the politics of the cities that they're in. Here in New Haven, for example, the city actually committed itself to something resembling carbon neutrality by 2030, which seems on one hand a joke, but if one took it not as a joke, how might we, and there's also a task force to figure out how to do this, would we, I mean, I don't think, how might we be involved with what they're doing and really force them to do it and help them figure out how to do it and be troops on the ground to get it done? And what? Racial allies. And right, and have alliances with, with the racial diversity that makes this city what it is.
So again, I'll say a couple of things, and Shamu, you should feel free to pitch in. But first of all, of course, I love the question, right? That question is now the right question for this moment. So I'll give a couple of different answers to it. Firstly, Tu B'Shvat, at some point, I still want to say a couple more things about Tu B'Shvat, but put your hands up if you've ever been to a Tu B'Shvat Seder. Few people, right? So a Tu B'Shvat Seder is a nice thing and I'm in favor of it. But Tu B'Shvat, I want to say, is more than fruit and nuts. And in the same way that I began by saying that every holiday comes to remind us of something, you can celebrate Tu B'Shvat with a Tu B'Shvat Seder. But I want to say that next year, I want to invite this shul to reach out to some of the other neighboring shuls and say, let's do a Tu B'Shvat event together. And we may incorporate a Tu B'Shvat Seder in it. Maybe we'll say a blessing over some fruit and some nuts. But what we actually want to do is we want to bring together the Jewish community. We want to invite the mayor of New Haven. We want to invite 2 or 3 of the city councillors. We want to invite whoever is the head of the Sierra Club locally. We want to invite somebody from NRDC, and we want to say, we're the Jewish community. And as the Jewish community, it's our New Year for trees. And one other thing I just want to say in parentheses before I finish this. Historically, certain sorts of things happen in a very formulaic way. And the Jewish community says, we're against attacks on Israel, and elected officials say, oh yes, we are too. The Jewish community says, we're against anti-Semitism, elected officials say, oh yes, we are too. It has a different kind of force. If the Jewish community comes together and invites key stakeholders in the community and says, as a Jewish community, we care about sustainability. We care about food sovereignty in New Haven. We care about pollution, and we want to know what pollution is in wealthier neighborhoods and poorer neighborhoods and what the city is doing to rectify that. That's what it is to frame Jewish life forwards into some of these questions. So that's, as it were, my first and biggest answer. Second thing I want to say is that happily there is an explosion. 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Well, it's also like 3 Jews, 7 organizations. So I want to say, as well as HAZON, there is JCAN, the Jewish Climate Action Network, that you can be in touch with, who are doing particularly local political organizing. There is Dayenu, that's doing a certain amount of national political organizing. There is Mirala Goldsmith, who has an organization in DC, which I'm embarrassed I've just blanked, but I'm going to put it in the chat, which is doing Jewish lobbying around the environment in DC. And again, we're happy to put you in touch with people. But again, I think the heart of it is actually coming together as a community and saying, oh, we care about this. And people will come, of course. Elected officials are really happy to come, and especially if you bring other communities together. Shamu, do you want to add anything to that?
I'll just add that one of the places that we're bringing this institutional greening, the SEAL program, together with the work that Adama does is that in March, we're actually doing an Adama at Home, the 3-week program that Josh is a part of now for SEAL communities. So these are supporting lay leaders in congregations with connections and Jewish learning and community to continue doing the hard work that you all are doing. And so I'll put that link as well in the chat.
And I would also add that as you look at the calendar of the shul and of Hadassah and of different institutions on this call, as well as Purim and Pesach coming up, as well as the Shemitah year, April 22nd is Earth Day. And you should plan as a community, Jewishly, to register Earth Day. We're going to do an event called Sound the Call from 11 a.m. to noon that day, which will be online, and we'd love for you to participate in it, but feel free to do something that evening. It's going to be an appropriate time to do it.
There, yeah, I know, I was muted, I was trying. Okay, thank you. At the moment, we have no more questions lined up. Anybody have something they want to, is this Jim or Jennifer?
This is Jen.
Okay, okay, go ahead.
I guess it's sort of following up on Jim's question, because again, in thinking about ourselves as part of the community, so much of the social justice work in New Haven, because it is a significantly African-American and Latino city, has been like kind of actively led by Christian pastors and churches. And so I'm wondering how we build those bridges, since we have the same goals and the spiritual connections that you make, besides just the kind of pragmatic arguments about let's get rid of the environmental hazards that make it impossible for people to breathe in certain areas of the city.
Can I take this for a second?
Yeah.
Just for Nigel and Shamu's knowledge, I am one of our Tikkun Olam co-chairs, and that's why I'm jumping in. And that is that through our Tikkun Olam work, we have a lot of relationships with the interfaith community in New Haven through our work at Columbus House, with Abraham's Tent, with Chapel Haven, etc. And those are through Desk. And we try to enhance those with every single involvement that we have with those organizations and with that project. So I think building on relationships we already have with both people committed to social justice in those congregations and building bridges between clergy, we already have sort of the starts of an infrastructure for doing that. We just need to capitalize it and have the leadership within our own congregation and the passion. And obviously, we know there are people on here tonight who have that passion and those leadership qualities, who could, with whom we are certainly willing to share all those resources and get that kind of a ball rolling.
And I just want to add, Daryl, I agree with everything that you said, and Jen, I just want to add that this country, in one sense, and the world is very fractured, and yet, in fact, the environment is a shared issue that really, really brings people together in profound ways. The Pope is going to do a gathering, I think, in May at the Vatican. It's the 6th anniversary of Laudato Si, his encyclical on the climate, which, if you haven't read it, it's totally worth reading. It's an amazing document. You can find it online. But he's actually going to do a gathering, I think, and he's going to bring together a whole group of Catholic leaders and say, forgive me for putting this in a way that the Pope would not, but he's going to say, guys, we published Laudato Si and everybody said how great it was, but what have we done? And I think he's going to say the Catholic Church needs to raise its game. And the work that HAZON is doing within the Jewish movement, within the Jewish community, is paralleled by an evangelical environmental movement, a Catholic environmental movement, the environmental movement in Black churches. And I want to further add, I meant to say this earlier on, it's particularly appropriate to say on Tu B'Shvat, that Israel in 1967 and 1973 was the thing that brought Jews together. Didn't matter if you were Orthodox, conservative, or Reform. If you were anyway Jewishly affiliated, you supported Israel. And today, Israel has actually become a fracture in many of our communities. It's become a really complicated topic. And one of the things that I want to say is that underneath the radar, it's not just that the Israeli environmental movement is doing incredibly great things, but in fact, underneath the radar is all sorts of other peace things withered. There are really profound relationships between Israelis and Palestinians in working together on environmental issues. And any of your communities can, could, and should invite people from Israel, including potentially Israelis and Palestinians, to talk together by Zoom about what they're doing as a model of working together. It would be remiss if I didn't mention HAZON's Israel ride, right? Every year since 2003, we've done a bike ride in Israel. Elliot Weinstein has done it on quite a number of occasions. And we ride from Jerusalem to Eilat, itself a remarkable way to see Israel. And we raise money for a master's program in environmental leadership at the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies that raises money for a master's program for Israeli Jews, Israeli Palestinians, and Jordanians. And it's an incredible program. This year, for the first time, not only is this ride going to happen again this October, November, and any of you who wants to ride from Jerusalem to Eilat, Elliot, are you in this year?
I am, yep,
yes.
Signed up already.
Anybody who wants to ride from Jerusalem to Eilat with the Honorable Sir Elliot Weinstein, and maybe Josh, if he's there, you're invited. And this year, for the first time, we're also going to have virtual riders. So even if you don't want to get on a bicycle in Israel, at least for pieces of it, you're going to be able to see it. But all of that, Jen, going back to your question, is yes, it's really profound to come together across religious difference on these issues.
I have I have one more thing I want to say. I don't have anybody lined up right now. I think that you've laid out an overwhelming number of options, vision and directions and small and large projects for us to engage in either individually or as a congregation or as a larger metropolitan community or as a global actor. And that's inspirational. But as a leader, I will tell you that I'll bet you people who are here tonight are absolutely overwhelmed and won't know what direction to turn in because there are so many options for trying to make a difference that it's almost scary to even have to try to narrow it down to something we can do in our synagogue or as individuals. So I will tell, and I think that's amazing. I really think that's amazing. But what I think that I'd like to share with our participants tonight is you don't have to do everything. Nobody has to do everything. It's just great if everybody does something. And it's even greater if any one or three of you who are passionate about these things, and I know that there are more than three of you who are on tonight, because I know you all, will get together and start thinking of small steps that we can continue with in this congregation. We've been very lucky here that John Jay was passionate about these issues before it was popular to be passionate about them in the context of a congregation, and that we set out early. He set us up early to start thinking about these things and moving on these things. And I think it behooves us to follow that example and not be overwhelmed by the magnitude of it, just start taking little steps to continue the journey, whether that be with BEKI's unyielding campaign for food, for a food policy and food justice, or whether it be the people who set up the composting and make sure that that composting is done correctly and most productively, and that we use that composting to improve the garden that we have at Shul, or whether some people are more interested in interacting with the larger community, we can put you in touch with some of those people. So it doesn't have to be everything. And not everybody suddenly has to fly to Israel to do the bike ride, but knowing about it and knowing that you can talk to one other person who happens to have a teenager who wants to go to Israel and do something worthwhile, etc. All of those things are going to make a difference. That I just want to say that as a person who does a lot of organizing, don't let it overwhelm you. Take one step at a time. That's all. I'd like to thank you. I want to turn it over to anybody who has any other comments to make. Marcia.
I want to just mention that there is an environmental fund for the benefit of BEKI at the Jewish Foundation in New Haven. It's the Eric I.B. Beller Environmental Fund for the benefit of BEKI. And it has a distribution every year to BEKI because it's a smallish fund at the moment. And because interest rates have varied over the years, it has been a somewhat modest contribution, but it comes to BEKI every year, in addition to all the other ways that BEKI gets funds. And it's dedicated to environmental issues. It's something that we could build on.
We just want to say a big thank you. Really, you guys are really wonderful. I mean, really seriously, from the questions, from the things that you've already done, it's really clear that this is a really thoughtful and serious and wonderful community. And Daryl, what you said is absolutely right. And to be clear, on the one hand, this is a big challenge, and there is no one size fits all solution. Different people care about different things. But that's why, if I had to say just one thing, it would be pick a date to all come together, as many of you as can, and actually start to engage with each other and flesh out a vision for the next few years. Get yourselves excited, flesh out a big vision, and then together say, okay, here's this one thing that we're going to do. But that's a big thank you from me. Feel free. You can go to HAZON.org. We won't bombard you, but if you're not on our mailing list, just go to HAZON.org and put in your name and email. We'll keep you in touch. Shamu, do you have a last word from you?
No, just thank you all, and you're an inspiration just to hear the questions and the motivation, and thank you all.
A tech note, Shoshana, before I turn it over to you, which is when we record these Zoom sessions, the text of the chat is also recorded and available. And that is, this particular time especially, I will make sure to mine the text for all of the links that have been posted. And if you're interested in getting them, you can just contact me. And I'm going to encourage those of you who were inspired and moved tonight to contact Rachel, because she's here. Contact somebody on the executive board to say, this is something I'd like to work with other people, because that's the only way things start and get done. Okay, so thank you. Shoshana, take it away. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Unmute. Am I now?
Now you're okay.
It's been a very long day.
Yes.
Jennifer, I wanted to just bring your comment to the group, unless you want to do it yourself.
Oh, I was just saying that although people will pick and choose the individual projects that they're interested in, the things that are manageable and feasible, that I do think that the process of coming up with that big 7-year plan and that 7-year vision, which I think is a really attractive one, and I think a really essential and core one, is a collective process that we do need to do together.
Thanks. I thought that was a great idea, Nigel, when you brought it up, and it really resonated for me, because especially in times of change and the climate issues and sustainability, it's really the issue of our lives at this point. And to have some kind of process where we're visioning together as a community what's important would really be an amazing experience. So we'll have to put that one on the list. Thank you both for coming. Thank you, Josh, for spearheading this. Thank you, Josh's parents, for coming, because that's always fun to see people's parents at these things. Next week, we're going to have another environmental program really focused on trees for Tu B'Shvat. Caroline Scanlon from the Urban Resource Initiative in New Haven, which is a group that does a number of things, including planting trees and working with young folks to have them involved with the planting and other environmental projects. And she is going to come and talk to us about the work that they do, and to share her love of trees with us. So I hope you'll all join us next Wednesday at 7. And it was great to see everyone.
And give blood.
Oh, right, give blood.
Yes, we have a blood drive going on Monday. Please sign up to donate blood. And even if you can't give blood, if you've had trouble before, contact me, because we need a few more greeters to just direct people in the building and make sure that everything is being done according to COVID restrictions. So,
Wait, Shoshana,
Marcia?
Shoshana, did you really mean to say that Carolyn is speaking at 7 next.
I'm sorry,
Wednesday.
it's,
Eight.
I'm
Eight.
sorry, it's 8. I really did have a very long day and I'm very
Yeah.
discombobulated. I'm sorry. Yes, it's 8. Thank you, Rachel.
Okay. That
Anybody
it?
else?
Okay.
Can
Did
I
say
add a
anything else
thank you?
Totally wrong.
I'd just like to add a thank you, Nigel and Shamu. Thank you very much. Presentation was excellent. We found a lot of chapter members happen to be grandparents, and I think unless we've had kids at Ezra or younger, teenagers or so on involved so that they knew about HAZON, there's a lot of question marks that I got by email. So, and we also had a region representative, Sharon Sobel, attended the talk. So I'm really heartened by this. Plus, Hadassah has a huge advocacy group. Of course, climate is very important to us and the environment. So I was delighted, and I will pass on all the information to Connecticut region. And we're expanded right down to New Jersey now. So we'll continue to follow through with you. I went onto the website, a lot of good information. So we'll see what we can do. So thank you so much.
Very good, very good. Yashiko. Good. Great to meet everybody.
Thank you.
I think that, yeah. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Everybody
night.
stay safe and well.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Good night.
Island Toad. Good job, Josh.
Well, Manucha. Well, Manucha.
Nice, Josh. Good job.
Thank you to all.
This was a real pleasure. Thanks for moderating, Daryl.
Oh, you're welcome. Becky, Becky, you've got your work cut out for you.
You missed Josh.
No,
I thought,
amazing. I don't know where this
there we
tailwind just
go.
came from, but it's incredible.
Yeah, Josh is.
There's a gift for you.
Josh, I want to share with you. You there, Josh?
Oh, yes, I'm here. Sorry.
Yeah.
Am I on mute? Yep.
We just converted our last appliance in our household to mean that there is no direct fossil fuel inputs to our home now, other than that we're grid tied, but pay the surcharge to have that be translated to renewable energy. But we just got off gas and oil as of this morning, and it's
Awful
just
tough.
thank you. I'm like beside myself. It's been a very long project, and so I'm ready to start the next one with Becky. Let's go.
Yeah, seriously.
Electric car. Do you have an electric car?
Yes.
And also, Becky
What
bikes everywhere when she can too.
That bike's even better.
No, but we do, and we converted our the last appliance was the hybrid electric hot water heater. We converted our gas heat to electric mini split duct heats, our gas cooking stove to an electric microwave toaster oven and induction hot plate. And yeah, it's been a slow, gradual process, like chipping away at it, like whenever we could. It's not been an all at once thing, but there's a lot of federal rebates and subsidies, and
yeah.
The hot water heater was basically free. This is incredible. $1,000 hot water heater, $750 Connecticut rebate, and $300 federal rebate.
That's
free
wonderful.
hot water. Yeah, unbelievable.
Good stuff out there.
Where are you guys? Are you in Israel, or are you?
We're in Pennsylvania.
Ah,
A little town called York, Pennsylvania.
Little town.
Middle of York, PA. Now Josh turned out so well out of York, Pennsylvania.
Hey, it's the what is it? The Pennsylvania, the loving of trees, right?
Yeah, it's a pretty good state. It's a nice state.
Harley Ben David also.
Okay.
Harley Davids are made. Well, the Harleys are made in York, Pennsylvania. So we assemble them all. You're right near our house.
Harleys? I love Harleys. I got a soft spot for Harleys.
Emily, how are you doing? Are you all right?
I had my vaccination today, so I was keeping my eyes closed tonight. I had a very active day.
Great. That's great.
And I hear URI is, the URI interns, in the last few years that I was teaching at Yale School of forestry, which is now the School of the Environment, the interns were required to take my seminar to be able to be interns. I mean, I am loving this so, but I had to keep quiet and keep my eyes closed.
No, that's okay. It's great. I'm glad to hear that you were able to get it. And I hope that you won't have any, reactions to it.
I so far I have not. I had
That's
this
great.
early this morning. Now, there's a big project at Gather New Haven, which is what the New Haven Land Trust and New Haven Farms and other organizations as well, gardening and farming, as well as open preserves. They they have individual preserves, and I was thinking, what is the nearest one to BEKI? And it very well might be the West River, where you might have a group that would consider assisting in that particular preserve. It's on Whaley Avenue, a little further north of you.
Becky, isn't that where the US Wires did their reverse Tashlich?
Yeah.
That could very well be.
You're on mute, Becky.
Sorry, we did it right down. I don't think we did it in the preserve Emily's talking about, but yeah, Emily, I was just going to mention that. Are you familiar with the reverse Tashlich thing that we've been doing the last couple of years?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. So instead of throwing things into the water, we've been pulling them out of the water. We've been having a
bravo.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's terrific.
We call it reverse, spelled R-I-V-E-R-S-E. So it's rivers. Yeah.
Well, rivers, particularly in our area, are tidal, and so there's always reverse river.
There you go. There you go.
Oh. But I have a project for you where there are very active people leading that particular preserve, and it's adjacent to a housing project.
Yeah, well, I've worked in that preserve. I've done cleanup there. It's a great place to work. Yeah.
And I was at their meeting late last night because I'm on their committee, but I don't do the hiking around anymore, but I sort of try to act as the intermediary and suggest ideas, and sometimes they take them, and they've got lots of great ideas, so that there's a really active project that can be gone into by BEKI.
Great.
And I see it as funding as well as action, joining together, and also with a Jewish presence right there. I really love that to be seen, and it's my thing. Okay, I'll stop.
That's good.
All I'm going to say is there's a lot of wonderful creative ideas, and there's a lot of energy and passion, and what it needs at BEKI is just the leadership to kind of cull all that, to corral that, and figure out how to make that an integral part of what the synagogue is doing. And so hopefully one of you who is passionate about it, or several of you, can, sit down and forge a road forward.
I did send a text to Rachel, and
good.
I've had on my mind, I've mentioned it, quietly to a few people, but for several years, the idea of a sustainability position at BEKI, in addition to a committee, just, another role on the board. That's kind of something I have. I think I mentioned it to you. I did mention it to you, but along the way, I'm in the middle of a million other things. But I'm also curious to see what
a board position. But and you have to remember.
No. Just saying in conversation.
Yeah. In conversation. Yeah. What I will tell you is, because they cut down the board several years ago, because there was a chairperson for everything on the board, try to say not everything has to be on the board. People can do things that, and have intermediaries. I think that it speaks to the values of a congregation when you establish a standing committee for something and have somebody representative to the board. So I would certainly
Right.
support that kind of a, you know, that kind of a stance going forward. But, you know,
Because I did try to chair the committee, the Green Committee, a couple of years ago when we had those things on the high holiday cards.
yes.
And I assembled a group of people who had actually very diverse interests, and therefore there wasn't a focus. But I think we're in a whole new time and place. And I'm
I
also
do
very
too.
curious to see, for example, what Josh and other people in the congregation want to do. Because, you know, if there are other people out there wanting to take the lead, then I'm cool being a follower too, you know, and I'm always doing my own thing on the side.
Right.
So-
Right. No, well, I do think that things have changed. And I do think there's not just interest, but passionate enthusiasm. I don't know if that's redundant, but
No.
for starting to, no, not necessarily, I guess, for moving forward, especially at this time of transition, when we're going to have to do it on our own and not depend on John Jay for it.
Right.
Not that that was passionate leadership, but it certainly was leadership in terms of setting us into a mindset and taking certain actions that brought those issues to the fore. At least
I think we can
while
also
ago.
look for that as
Yes,
part
I
of the
do
transitional
too.
process.
I do too, and I think
Yeah,
that
and
should be
advocate
part of
for
the
it.
discussion. Exactly. You know, what's
Yeah.
going to have to happen now is that there will need to be an assessment of what are the things we really want. What do we want to reflect the values of what are the values, and how do we go forward to engage leadership that will do that, that will support it.
Thanks for calling in, parents.
Yeah.
Nice to see you.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I need to go myself, so I wanted
Emily,
to
I just
end
wanted
the
to
session.
Emily, I want to say nice to meet you. I don't think we've met. Emily, I think, did I pronounce your name?
Yeah, Aleph Mem Lamed Yud, Ha'im Shali.
Olive. Oh, okay. Yeah, beautiful.
AIMLEE in English.
Okay.
Oh, well, thank you for sharing.
All right, Lila Tov.
Bye-bye.
Very glad to meet you.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Stay
Where
well.
in New Jersey is this extending to? Do you know? Does anybody know?
Oh, no, when she was saying it extends to New Jersey, she was talking about Hadassah. She was talking about their Hadassah region.
Yeah, I have family in Teaneck, including my 16-year-old granddaughter.
There's Hadassah in New Jersey, but if you want to know, I mean, that's what she was talking about. So
yeah, no, I'm in Hadassah here.
Yeah, right.
Emily, did you used to work at Woods Hole? Am I correct in connecting you with Woods Hole?
Yes, yeah, I have a house there actually, but my lab has been there with the MBL, the Marine Biological Lab, for decades.
Amazing environmental elder here in our midst.
That's me.
I'm learning that. It's really amazing.
Okay. Or as we say in tree language, alder.
Alder, not elder.
Well, I work with cedars, so we could play with that in language as well. Okay.
Woods Hole, right?
But you know, I know you because I found out that you were the wife of CJ when CJ was doing all of that phenomenal environmental work in Yale, when it was not such a comfortable position for him to be in, because there was a lot of, we need neat lawns, we need everything to look right. And so as soon as I saw that you were another person, I was delighted, but it was because of CJ.
Yeah. Hey, I'm pretty delighted to be part of that package. Anyway.
I'm glad you're there.
Okay, I really have to close the session.
Good night, everyone.
See you later.
Good night. Good night.